Robert, great to have you. Please introduce yourself. You can share your screen and we'll jump in.
Fantastic. Hey, everyone. Great to see you all. Before I dive in, everyone hear me okay? Cool. Fantastic. Hopefully I still look like I look in my headshot. In the meantime, let me load up our presentation here. And to answer your question, yes, we do have a deck for this. Who would I be if I didn't have a deck handy? I have basically a deck for everything, including weekend plans sometimes. So let me load this up here.
You must be so fun to hang out with on the weekends, like just going through PowerPoints.
Hey guys, here's all of our options. So on slide 3 here, you can see that we have this bar. Yeah, it's a ton of fun. I'm a hoot. All right, so there we go. Is everyone seeing this? The big 3 decks?
Yes.
Okay, great. Before we get started, I'm just going to take a sip of my oversized jug of water because this is how I've been making sure that I could drink enough water throughout the day going forward. So you may see this ridiculous thing. Also, everyone, please say hi to my assistant, Belle. She'll be joining us on this call. She's going to be shadowing us for this. And she is a good girl. So let's dive right in. Cool. Hey, everyone. So today we're going to dive into, again, the big 3 decks. These are the 3 decks that every founder needs, along with how to make them. And so as you go through your fundraising process, there's going to be a number of different interactions you're going to have with investors. Some of them are going to be in these big public facing events. Think your demo days, think your presentations in front of boardrooms. Others are going to be, I'm sending a deck over to a VC that's interested and they need to be able to put together an investment memo about my company. So they need the detail. And in other situations, I'm just trying to garner interest. Maybe one of my investors says, hey, do you have something I could forward over to some friends to see if they'd be interested in investing as well? And so these different contexts all require different types of pitch decks. And today we're going to talk about each of those 3. So without further ado, let's dive right in. First, we're going to go through an intro on myself and Deco and what we do. Next, we're going to talk about the big 3 decks, along with some examples so you could see some of these in context. And then we'll dive into the remainder of this for Q&A. And so with that, first of all, hello. My name is Robert. You can call me Robert, Rob, really anything but Bobby. And for anyone who joined us on the last Midday Connect call, this is a good 45 seconds for you to maybe catch up on some emails or scroll through Twitter. But for those who don't know me yet, a little bit about me. I've been working in marketing and venture capital since I was literally 17 years old. This is everything that I've ever known. I found my first deal in a detention. That's a whole other story for later. And I'll spare you my professional history, but the things that you need to know about me today are that I'm an active VC and I'm a founder myself. So on the founder side, I'm the founder of Deco. We're the largest pitch deck development company and the leaders in the space. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what that means in a second. But on top of that, I'm also the co-founder and GP of Timeless Ventures, which invests in revenue-generating impact-focused businesses. And I'm number 2 at Evolution VC Partners, which is, we are early investors in about 280 culture tech companies or technology products and services you interact with every day. Some of the smaller logos on the side have other companies that I've either founded or have been a part of. I've worked with public companies. I've worked with companies that are massive and companies that are tiny. So I've really seen every single type of interaction between the investor and the founder, both as a founder myself who's fundraised and an investor who's deployed capital. So with that, we'll talk about Deco. We are the leading pitch deck development company. And what makes us separate from other pitch deck development companies is that rather than just hiring, let's say, Robert, right? The reason that people hired me when I first started this company is because I'm a VC. I know what I want to see cross my own desk, and I know how to build the kind of decks that I want to see cross it. And I never use the templates. You could find those templates online. I never use those. I always want to create these things from scratch to be able to get to the core of what made things exciting for each company. As a result, as we continue to grow, we replicated me. I took this to other venture capital funds and I said, hey, do you guys want to make pitch decks for startups? It's been an excellent way for me to meet founders, build goodwill. Do you all want to do the same? And the response has been overwhelmingly positive. We've worked with over 200 different startups and venture capital funds to date. I can't tell you how many decks at this point that turns into. It's a lot of decks. We've worked with over 25 different industries, and this number down here of 35 is actually a little outdated. We're now about 45 principals and designers on our team, and we're constantly expanding that team. What happens with Deco is we connect you with a VC in your industry. So let's say you are a SaaS company. We will connect you with a SaaS specific investor. That investor will then create the deck that they would want to see across their own desk, and our designers will then design it, and we manage the entire process. So, Series C, Series D, Series E companies, they all have these internal deal teams. Think your VP of corporate finance or your investment bank who creates these things, but early stage companies don't have these things. And so we're bringing that over to these early stage companies and venture funds. And so that's a little bit on us and how we do what we do. And without further ado, why don't we dive in? So let's talk about the big three decks. First is your public presentation deck, and your leave behind deck, and your teaser or overview deck. We're going to dive into each one of these three, but why don't we start with the teaser? So if you see this guy over here on his phone sipping a coffee, this is about how I view 90% of my deals. The first way I ever see a deal, I am on the move, I am doing something, maybe I'm on a Zoom with another founder, even in the middle of being pitched, and out of the corner of my eye, I get an email in my inbox that says, hey, you might be interested in this deal, take a look. Then from there, I am now spending maybe 35, 40 seconds on this company and deciding not whether or not I want to invest, but whether or not I want to take a meeting with that company, whether or not this is a fit for my firm, whether or not I'm interested in what they're doing. And so that decision happens really quickly. And your teaser or overview deck does exactly that. It's a content light version of your company's deck that's meant to capture investor attention and garner their interest. So in these cases, it's typically shared over email and viewed on the go. Think again, one investor forwarding this over to another investor, or you pitching an investor cold. In these scenarios, again, I see a bunch of these deals every single day. And so I want to make sure that you're getting the right things over to me. The things I want to know about in this scenario are quickly your traction, your team, and your product. If I have that, I have enough to understand, cool, this company's performing well. Wow, the team is awesome. I'd love to get to know these founders. And three, the product and what they're doing fits into my firm's thesis. So hone those three things when you're sharing the teaser, but do not get bogged down in the details. Again, I am reviewing this out of the corner of my eye. I cannot stress enough how quickly investors view through this teaser deck and make a split-second decision about whether they're interested. So really keep your deck as content light as possible and focus on things like your numbers, things like product visuals, things like that, that really make this obscenely easy for me as an investor to view and get interested in. Next, we'll talk about the leave behind deck. This is the big deck. This is the detailed one. The leave behind deck is a deep dive into your company that gives investors a real jumping off point into one, their due diligence process, and two, their investment memo. So first off, this is the slide where this is the deck where you go into the details. I'm talking unit economics, margins, intellectual property, your go-to-market strategy, the details of your financials. This is the space to go into detail. On top of that, this is your opportunity to control the narrative around your company. At this point, if you're sending someone this leave behind deck, it's important to remember that now you are not in the room to talk about this company, and you are creating an advocate for your company to go present this to someone else. Either that's an analyst or an associate at a VC fund, or even a partner at a VC fund who needs to go take this and go make a case to their other coworkers and colleagues at their fund, or it's an angel investor talking about this with their friends to decide whether or not they want to invest in this thing. But either way, once this leave behind deck is in someone's hands, you are not there to talk about the company. And so the deck has to do a ton of talking while you're not in the room. And so a good tactical tip as a way to do that is to keep your titles in sentence form. And what that means is rather than saying projections, instead say, we 3x company revenues over the course of 2 months, or over the course of 2 years, which is more realistic. Now investors say, okay, that is the sentence that they're going to probably copy and paste into their investment memo and say the company 3x revenues over the course of 2 years. That is where the leave behind deck comes into play and how it gets used. On top of that, they're using it as a jumping off point for due diligence. So if you have intellectual property you want them to see, include details of that intellectual property. Do you have patents? Do you have proprietary data? Do you have something else that is explicitly going to be a part of their due diligence process? If you have supplemental research that you want them to see as a way for them to say, assess the size of your market, this is the space to provide all of those things. And in the example I'll give, I'll show you what that means, along with even the ability to click in and access additional resources, which is kind of an overlooked feature that people don't realize you can add into your pitch decks. But again, this is the detailed version. And this is going to be the version that people are going to be spending the most amount of time on. If I spent 30 seconds on the last deck, I'm spending 3 hours on this deck and really diving in and chewing on all the details because I'm using this to inform my investment decision. So from there, we'll dive into the last one, which is your public presentation deck. This is the one for your demo days. This is the ones for your webinars. This is the one that everyone sees. And I mean, everyone sees. So one, do not include anything in this version of the deck that you don't want your competitors to see. And the same goes for your teaser deck. Investors at that stage, if they're just viewing you in a public context like a demo day, or they got your deck out of a, say just a cold email, they're under no obligation to keep that information confidential for you. In fact, if you're sending this and they have a competitor that they're invested in, chances are they're going to send this deck straight to your competitor. So really make sure in these versions of the deck that you're not including any information you don't want everyone to see. On top of that, this is really where design comes into play. Words in these scenarios are an absolute last resort for something that a graphic can't do. So rather than saying we 3x company revenues over the course of 2 years and then providing a detailed spreadsheet explaining that, just show me a chart that shows revenues going up. And then from there, you talk over and explain what happened. You shouldn't be able to read off these slides because there is not enough information for you to read off these slides. But if you do have a lot of that information, absolutely do not read off the slide. Investors could read off the slide. Your audience could read off the slide. That's why it's on the projector. So instead, focus on engaging your audience. And this is the last thing about public presentation decks that are really cool, is you can do things in these decks that you can't do in leave behind decks. For example, a good way to say engage your audience would be to put a big question mark on the screen. And that's the whole slide. It says a big question mark on the screen that says, have you experienced XYZ problem? And then you could just say, clap if you've ever dealt with that. And now the audience is clapping, they're cheering, they're involved, they're having fun with you. This is the kind of, but that slide, obviously you would never include in a leave behind deck because it wouldn't make sense if you're not physically using it as a storytelling mechanism. So in your public presentation deck, you can have these opportunities to really engage your audience in different ways. And so now I've given you a lot of information about these 3 different types of decks and these 3 different types of slides. So why don't we go into some examples? I'm going to go into the example of public presentation, teaser, and leave behind deck. So you can see how this works. We're going to take the example of revenue growth. You can see in this scenario, this company has had 3x year over year growth. They're going to do they did $3 million last year in 2022. Awesome. Very short, simple. If I were the founder of this company, I would take this time now and probably take a full minute to explain the details of where that revenue growth is coming from and how that's working for us. But as you can see on the slide, there's little to no information minus a chart, a number, and that's about it. Now in the teaser deck, you could see there's a little more information, right? In 1 year, we tripled company revenues. Well, how? Through consumer product sales, B2B enterprise revenue, and software subscriptions in this fake company's example. right? So now an investor understands, oh, wow, they have consumer products, they have B2B enterprise sales, and they have software subscriptions for their tech. That's pretty cool. That's a pretty well-diversified revenue model. I'd love to learn more about that and speak to the founder. Now you might be asking questions about, well, what is the breakdown of that revenue? Which parts of this are you prioritizing more? When did you introduce your B2B enterprise revenue? There's all these other questions. None of that is included here. Again, I don't want my competitors to know any of that, but this is probably stuff you could find on the website. Now, this is what would be involved in a leave behind deck. As you could see, significantly more detailed than any other version of this deck. In 1 year, we tripled company revenues primarily through the growth of our enterprise offering. So now you could see that is the one sentence, back to what I was saying before, that I would take as the person putting together the investment memo and copy and paste directly into my memo. In 1 year, XYZ company tripled their revenues primarily because they introduced this new enterprise offering. And here you could see, again, answering that question, when did you introduce that offering? In 2022, we introduced our enterprise offering, which enabled high margin recurring revenue. Awesome. This is really speaking when I'm not in the room now. You understand exactly how this company is making its money. On top of that, you could even see down here a breakdown of that revenue between D2C subscription and B2B or enterprise revenue, along with when they introduced it. Now with that, you could also see that we added in a third layer, which is what are our projected revenues for this year? Now that's something, again, I really don't want a competitor to see. I don't want other people to know. So this is something that is exclusive to our investors after they've already met with us. And you could see this chart even includes a detailed breakdown of the revenue and where the revenue each year was really coming from. And you could see in 2022, they introduced their enterprise revenue that helped expand. And then in 2023, they're expecting to really grow revenues, again, primarily through the growth of their enterprise revenue in this fake scenario. And before we were talking about access to additional resources, in this case, don't be afraid to use this. You could link buttons and you could make those buttons on PowerPoint, Keynote, etc. Once it's in PDF format, you could click and have it auto write an email for you that goes directly to your CFO or directly to you that says, hi, I'm an investor. I'm interested in reviewing your detailed financial model. Can you please send it over? Or you could link to a website, a YouTube video, whatever it is that you want to link to. You can do that. And you could include all these additional resources in that they could then dive in on. So to summarize, we've gone through the 3 different types of decks. We've gone through your teaser deck, your public presentation deck, and your leave behind deck. We've gone through the details of what to include in all those, how investors are viewing them, and what you should be considering as you're creating them. And so with that, thank you guys. And why don't I open it up to any questions?
Robert, that was awesome. Thank you. We've got some questions in the chat. If you want to take a quick look there, otherwise I can just read them, or people can unmute themselves as well. Alan asked about supplemental information. Would this go in an appendix to the deck? Is that what you would suggest?
So that's a good question. So when you describe supplemental information, I'd split that into 2 answers. The first is stuff that is a part of your story, but let's say not above the fold version of your story. So case studies for individual customers and things like that. That kind of supplemental information or additional market data, that kind of stuff, you could throw that into the appendix. I'm a very big fan of a big appendix and a short kind of pre-appendix. This way, the pre-appendix shows the core story of my company. If you have never gotten past that pre-appendix, those 12, 15 slides before the appendix, you would have a detailed understanding of the company. But if you're really interested in anything more, you go into the appendix and you could have, I mean, that at that point, there's no rules. You could have 50 slides in there. My recommendation in those cases is to pick slides in your appendix and go above the fold and link to those slides. So for example, if I'm talking about my revenue model, great. Why don't I also link to the slide that shows case studies for my customers and how we've expanded with those customers? And so you could say, click to jump to case study and put that in a little corner. that jumps them to slide 36 in your appendix, which opens up all of your case studies. So now they could really dive in. So that's one version. The other version is supplemental research, data, and information. Think market research reports, think detailed videos of your product and all these other things that you want to be able to show, but a PDF on its own won't really allow you to do. Now, between all of us here, me and 50 of my closest friends here, we are building a version of this at Deco that will allow all of this to be in one place. But for now, the best way to do that is to either create a Google Drive link or a Dropbox link or some YouTube links and add buttons on your deck that say, click to access additional market research, click to access a video overview of our product, click. That will then open up a link that they could then view all that information on, but your core deck has stayed pretty clean, pretty neat, and pretty tight. So that's a good way to add supplementary information. Two tactical ways you could add supplementary information without overloading your pitch deck with information.
Very cool. Thanks. Let's do Chad's question, and then Karin, I know you've got your hand raised as well. Chad wondered about a team slide. Do you have an example of a good team slide for a teaser deck or the blurb that goes with the team?
Totally, yeah. And just to save us time, I won't search through the 200 plus companies here to find the perfect team slide for this, but the best way to describe this would be the difference between your teaser deck and your leave behind deck in terms of creating your team slide is on your teaser deck. You could include one sentence explanation of your team. And then from there, I would love to see each individual team member, headshot, name, title, and then just logos. Just give me logos of where you worked at, right? If I see the Apple logo and the Google logo, Netflix, Uber, and all these other, I'm going to know at that point that you kind of know your way around a tech company or around, banking or whatever it is that you identify with your company. And if I'm an investor in those spaces, I'll recognize those logos and I'll say, oh, that's impressive that he was involved there. In your leave behind deck, you could go into more detail. You could talk about your accomplishments at these different companies. So let's take that example again of Uber. Say you were VP of engineering at Uber. Which products were you responsible for building? That's really cool. If I recognize that feature, that is very cool for me to see, like, oh, that's the person who built the split fare technology at Uber. That's awesome, especially if you're building some kind of new bill paying software or something. So that's the difference, I'd say, between your leave behind deck and your teaser deck in terms of how much detail to go into. One includes just the logos. One will include logos with bullet points and accomplishments.
That's great. That's helpful. Karin, did you want to unmute and ask a question?
Yeah, I'm actually unmuted, but very quiet, hopefully. So a couple of quick things, kind of a follow on to that question that Chad had. So what about the advisors? In your teaser deck, do you put anything in there in your slide about advisors or no? Do you just go ahead?
No, please. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that was it. I mean, that was the advisor question. And then I have another question.
Cool. I can answer the first one first, or we could do both at the same time.
Probably the first one first, because you were just talking about team.
Totally. So where do advisors and say investors and things like that go? That's a good question. Let's start with investors. Investors could go into one of two places. Either they could go onto your team slide, include logos or names of your investors, and what they've and who they are. So if XYZ VC firm is involved, great. Or if ABC angel investor who founded this company is involved, fantastic. That could go either on your team slide or on your fundraising ask slide. So we're raising $2 million to execute XYZ. Great. Existing investors include, and then there's a little wall of logos on the bottom. That provides that last bit of social proof that they'll probably need as they're making an investor decision. Advisors typically go onto the team slide. Is a very good place to put it. If you're the only two scenarios where I would probably separate that out of the team slide is if you're a biotech company or a venture fund. Venture funds have advisory boards. Those advisory boards are typically comprised of other investors, venture partners, et cetera, that their bios are probably equally as important because I need to be able to see, okay, who is the fund manager surrounding themselves with as they're making these investment decisions. The other one with biotech companies in general have certain, you call them like biotech related celebrities. These are people who are very well respected in the industry, and having them on your advisory board is sometimes even enough, especially because these things have long approval horizons, is sometimes even enough at your stage to say, oh, XYZ, people in biotech are involved with this company. They know what they're talking about. I know those guys. They definitely know what they're talking about. And if they've decided to put their name on this thing, I'll want to be involved too. Those are like the two scenarios I'd say where you want to break out advisors into a separate slide, but the rest you could probably put on the team.
That's for the leave behind though. I mean, if you're just pitching, I think I've had this issue is that there's so much information in our deck. Most of everything other than the first like 12 slides we put into an appendix. And I put those advisors on a separate slide because of a lot of really great advisors and things like that. It just seems like it's overwhelming at this point when I send out the leave behind deck. I'm trying to figure out a better way. I like your whole idea around putting the link into your Google slides that takes you to another slide somewhere else that gives you more information for somebody that is going to be writing the diligence memo. That's a great idea. I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Of course.
That was.
It's a great spot for it. What do you say?
Yeah, I think that was really my second question was really around the fact that our deck is now like 50 pages long or 50 slides long, and the really important stuff we can boil down to like 12 slides. But I have sent out that leave behind to some folks, and maybe they look and they just see the number of slides and they say, oh my gosh, that's way too many slides. Don't you have a shorter deck? And what they haven't noticed is that I put like a divider between the main deck and then I say appendix slides or appendix, and then they don't get it. So maybe in the future, I just send them the 12 slides and then I have those links in there. Maybe that's the better way to do it.
Yeah. And so and another way that I've seen done also is like, you can either link, which that's my favorite version, what you just described, which is just keep it tight and then link. People love that. It's interactive. It keeps them involved. It keeps them kind of continuing to stay involved inside of the deck and stay reeled in. The other way to do that is to even just give people two options on the intro deck. So you send them the 12 slide deck, but then there's a button on the title page that says click for detailed deck. And then,
oh, that's a great idea. Yeah.
Get away with both.
Okay. And
That's awesome. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Karen.
One other quick question. So this is just a new thing for me. I just sent a couple of investors a link to our Google Slides itself versus using DocSend. Do you advise for that or against that?
So I would advise in those scenarios, I would advise to keep it on DocSend for a few reasons. One, so when I open Google Slides links, maybe this is just because I'm biased because I run a debt company. But if I see that a company is making stuff in Google Slides, and I almost feel like I'm almost seeing an unfinished version of it, and I don't want to see an unfinished. They have the sidebar and the editing tab and all that. It makes it look like you may not be finished with the deck. And again, this could just be my personal bias. On top of that, there are a lot of benefits to DocSend. One, you could see when people are opening it. You could see how much time they spent on it, see how much time they spent on each individual slide. That helps you better understand, oh, this investor seems to be particularly interested in my competitors. Let me, send them some supplementary information on why, I'm better than my competitors at these things.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then on top of that, it's just a little less intimidating. Like when I see a bunch of these decks every day, for example, like one thing I'll also mention is never send a deck as an attachment. Like I have to right now out of my evolution email, I have to delete an email to send an email. Because there's just so many of these decks just sitting in attachments that I've been trying to work through and find and get out of.
Okay.
So, and investors definitely don't want to download it, and it's better to have it on docs, and it's something that everyone trusts and knows. And yeah,
That's great
Sure.
input, Robert.
you.
Thank you so much. We're at our typical ending time, but we've got a few more questions if you're willing to stick around for a couple more minutes. So Parker asked about the 3 decks. If you're going to look for acquirers, would you change anything between an acquirer deck and a fundraising deck?
that's a great question. So in the last conversation we had on Midday Connect, we talked about different investors you'll meet and how to tailor your pitch deck to each. And one of the investors we talked about was corporate and strategic investors. And the reason I'm giving this long-winded answer is that what we're talking about is a fundamentally almost different type of deck. In a corporate or strategic investor audience, that could be for M&A, strategic investment, partnership, etc. They are very focused on one thing and one thing only, which is like, how does your company accelerate my company? They're almost less interested in the return profile of your, what potential returns could look like for your company, because maybe it'll drive some incremental revenue for them, but chances are, if you're like like for example, OpenAI might be a tough example, but if Microsoft invested into a company and that company 3x after Series A, that's great. That probably makes up 1 day of Microsoft's revenue, right? They're not as interested in that. And I didn't see the OpenAI deck for Microsoft's investment into OpenAI, but I have to imagine that had very little to do with, say, the size of the market or what potential exits look like in the market, and a lot more around how can OpenAI and Microsoft work together? What are Microsoft's strategic objectives? How can OpenAI accelerate those objectives? And so the same thing goes for M&A. What are they buying? Are they buying access to your customer base because they want access to that new audience? Fantastic, dive in on that. Are they buying access to your tech? How will your product integrate with their product and what they're already doing? How will your dev team interact with their dev team? They're much more tactical and much more focused in those scenarios on how you're going to work with them as either your strategic investor or acquirer. So in those cases, you could have these 3 decks for all of them. But the content of your deck is fundamentally different than the content of an investor deck.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Totally.
Maybe last question from Pete Larkin. Do you start with a template and customize it, or are you building from scratch every time, just blank canvas?
So that's a great question. It is completely blank canvas. You could download we've all seen the templates: problem, solution, market size, competitive overview, how it works, blah, blah, blah. All of those. We've all seen those templates. There are certain slides that just don't, or sometimes certain businesses that just don't fit that slide structure. And so for us, we actually hand our team a completely blank doc. It has nothing on it. It's almost like a formality that we're even sending a blank doc to them, but it has nothing on it. And we challenge them to get to the core with each company around what makes it exciting. For example, you may not need a problem statement, or you may not need a competitive overview. And so you're just kind of shoehorning your business and your story into it. But if you're just introducing a fundamentally new behavior to the market, or you're capitalizing on a market opportunity that's been overlooked, you don't need a problem slide, because there's probably no defined problem yet by customers. So there's other ways for you to consider how you tell your story. But the big thing that I like to do, and a good tip when you're creating your pitch deck, and this is what I tell all of our principals on our team, is first think about all the reasons you wouldn't invest in the company. What are all the reasons you have to say no? So this market's too crowded, there's too much saturation at seed, and there hasn't been a breakout winner into Series A, Series B, Series C yet, whatever it is, right? From there, you would then work backwards and say, okay, these are the problems historically with the companies in this market. This is what makes my company particularly exciting. Because investors are probably already somewhat familiar, probably already seen a few of these deals. I'll give you a good example. is one deck we made was for a company called Eva. They're an event marketplace based out of Nashville, and you book talent for corporate events. So say, I want Seth Meyers at my, company retreat to do a stand-up set. Cool. This is the platform you do that. So now I've seen a dozen of these like event marketplaces, and I'm a musician myself. It's it. So I know that on these event marketplaces, chances are, one, I'm not making a lot of money as a musician, so the average contract value is low. Two, chances are the event venue is just going to pay me in cash because they don't want to pay out all the extra fees anyways. And so all these event marketplaces have been spending all this time trying to chase down $20, $30 transaction fees from different people. Whereas with Eva, what was cool about their platform is that since they're focused on corporate events and not bars, nightclubs, etc., their average contract value was 12 times larger than the average contract value of a bar or nightclubs person. So on that deck, what we did is we had a side-by-side, which showed the average industry average contract value, and then the average contract value booked on their platform. And the chart just said it all visually. Now, that's not the kind of thing that's in any template, but that's what happens when you work backwards and say, what makes this company exciting and why wouldn't I invest in this company? And then build the deck around that. So that immediately answers the question of like, oh, I've seen a million of these before. Oh, wait, but this one's very different. This one has like 12 times larger average contract values because they're pursuing this new market. Now I'm interested, and now I'm continuing to dive into the deck. I hope that's helpful.
That's awesome. This has been amazing. Robert, thank you so much. I think we're at time and we'll close up shop, but if any of you have questions for Robert, please reach out to him. Is it best via LinkedIn, Robert, or what would you suggest?
That's a great question. And to everyone, Karin, Parker, thank you guys, Pete, thank you guys all for saying some kind words here. And oh, Michael, I'm seeing all these. Thank you guys all for the kind words here in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and drop my personal email. It's robert@getdeco.com. And you could reach out to me there. Separately, if you just go to getdeco.com and you fill out the form on our website, secret, that goes to me. So I'll see that too. And so and by the way, guys, chances are if you're trying to sell to founders, that I'm sure you guys all know this, the info at and all that all goes to the CEO and to the CFO and all that stuff anyways. But yeah, so you could reach out through our website, you could shoot me an email directly, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, pick your favorite. I am here at this standing desk with Bell at all times of the day, including obscenely late at night. So feel free to reach out to me whenever it is. And I'd love to talk to you guys.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Robert. Thanks everybody for coming, and appreciate you being here. We'll be here next Tuesday. Look forward to seeing you all, and thanks for coming.
Thank
See
you.
you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Robert.